Liam, this is the Global Digest Think Tank Group. You are also our guest today.
I'm from the United States, but I've lived in Asia for the last 3.5 years now. After I finished my undergraduate at Princeton, I decided I wanted to be a pilot in the American Navy and found out that I was a very bad fit for that once I got properly exposed. Uh, so after that, I kind of circled back and spent some time doing some various private sector jobs to kind of get my life back on track. One of which included the English teaching job for a year, which was kind of my first exposure in Asia. And I found that I liked living in Asia so much here in Korea that I decided I wanted to pursue my master's degree here instead of going back to the United States. So consulted with my mentors, and they recommended I pursue a degree in Singapore, which is where I went. So I just finished up at the Lee Kuan Yew School there, and got my degree in Masters in International Affairs, specializing in international security.
You said U.S. should engage more in the region, in Asia region, and you recommend that U.S. engage with ASEAN. In order to engage with ASEAN, U.S. should accompany with Asia ally,
Yep.
Korea,
Yeah.
Japan, especially.
Yep.
So I'm not sure very much your argument and how it will work out. Let's see. I'm not sure how U.S. interest in Asia. It's really. I mean, Trump is try to getting away. He's look like let me stay alone.
I mean, I consider myself a pretty nonpartisan person, but I can kind of give you the genesis behind my thinking and the argument of the piece. So the United States has been talking about doing the pivot to Asia for over 10 years now, right? Uh, Under multiple administrations of both political parties. Recently, a gentleman at the American Enterprise Institute named Zach Cooper wrote an article in Foreign Affairs that very much influenced my own thinking, which essentially argued that this pivot to Asia had failed, right? For a very long time, even before this current Trump administration, U.S. Asia policy had been very long on style and rhetoric and very short on substance, right? So there's been talk about over and over again about how we're going to reallocate our focus and our forces from other parts of the world, particularly the Middle East, and into Asia, right? But it just really hasn't been happening, even with administrations that have been more, let's call it cooperative than the current administration, right? That being said, the number one foreign policy challenge for the United States remains the rise of China, right? We could argue over how friendly and how antagonistic U.S. Chinese relations are going to be, but fundamentally, there is going to be a certain level of contestation, right? Where it's in China's national interest to establish hegemony in Asia, and it's in America's interest to deny that hegemony, right? No other state on the in the world has anywhere near the levels of capabilities that China has, and therefore has the ability to change the international status quo in a way that is unfavorable to the United States than China does. So the problem then is America has this very long set of commitments in all other parts of the world, many of which tend to be much more immediately pressing than the China-related challenges in Asia, right? So China is able to slowly and steadily move the status quo in Asia in its direction away from the United States. And even when the United States issues positive rhetoric on Asia, its substance is not strong enough. So my
Right.
thought was, if we have a delta between where America Asia policy needs to be and where it currently is, we need to find solutions because the old pivot to Asia model has simply not been working. And my answer to that is stronger collaboration with our high trust, high capacity partners in this part of the world. So that means instead of just saying generically that we should be working more with Japan and South Korea, I'm saying that we should be more willing to delegate Asia policy to our high capacity, high trust allies, especially Japan, who are much more embedded in this region, who have a much stronger natural stake than we do, who so and therefore that their policy will allow us to work towards our joint goals of keeping a free and open Indo-Pacific in this part of the world. So that's really the thrust of the piece, is that American policy in Asia has been failing because it's been overconfident in itself. So the best way to address that overconfidence is to rely more upon those partners who we can trust the most and who have the highest capacity here. The number one, of course, being Japan, but also South Korea and Australia as well. And that's the main thrust of the argument of the diplomat piece I was trying to make.
Right. Well, you clearly said you desire for U.S. engagement in Asia Pacific specifically, and but I mean whether your desire will be fit with Trump desire, let's say the current administration, because I mean we argue many times, we all agree pivot Asia is the right policy, and many people agree, but it was failed. Biden government advisor, he said it was failed because they don't have sufficient, I mean, resources or sufficient budget or all the things. They did policy, but they did not able to fill the resources which were necessary to fulfill the policy that he admitted. I mean, we need primary level interest, desire of current leader, current administration.
I think what I'm calling for is something that would be less imperialistic than what you're suggesting, right? So past policies have largely been mediated through the hub and spoke alliance model, right? Where you're allied with Japan and Korea, for example, but they're not allied with each other, right? Which maximizes American control, right? In exchange for greater American investment, right? Uh, which is much more imperialistic, like you're saying. What I am saying, what we should be doing instead is deferring more of the decision making to our partners in this part of the world, right? The most obvious one being Japan, right? So that number one, it gives up a certain level of control from the United States. So that makes the character of American engagement in Asia less imperialistic. As far as the capabilities goes, which you raise, I mean, that's correct, right? So if you look at economic engagement with Southeast Asia states, there's no question that one to one, China is beating the United States in terms of material resources, right? It just makes sense. It's China's neighborhood. It's not America's neighborhood. But the point I was trying to make was if you combine trade, investment flows, things like that of Japan, South Korea, US together, it then beats out China, right? So I'm arguing we should be moving away from the hub and spoke model that's more imperialistic, that's relying more on material capabilities and brings in more input of our allies and partners in this part of the world and allows us to tap into their resources as well. I think, so the people who are advocating for this approach are much smarter and more accomplished than myself. One is named Kurt Campbell, and another one is named Rush Doshi. Those are probably the most important names. And that addresses to the point that you're right. Under the current administration, you're probably not going to see much enthusiasm for what I'm proposing. Fortunately, in the United States, every 4 years we have an election, right? So depending on who wins the presidential election in 2028, you could see a very different orientation, right? An administration with a very different orientation, and you could see someone like Dr. Campbell actually being named the Secretary of State, right? And if you had a Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell, in place, you would see much more enthusiasm for this kind of joint influence building operations in Asia with our partners, right? So that's kind of the term that I refer to in the piece. It's called allied scale, and the term was coined by Rush Doshi and Kurt Campbell. So you're right. It's not something that I would expect to be implemented in the next 2 years or so, but we'll see, right? It's important to have a long-term vision and remember there's not just one America and there's lots of different directions the U.S. policy towards Asia could take in 2028, 2029, and beyond. So we'll just have to see.
I mean, U.S. should see engagement in Asia Pacific region is U.S. survivor or not in terms of empire.
Isolationism is very strong in the United States right now, right? So I don't think there's very little desire to maintain a imperialistic structure anywhere in the American body politic right now, right? But short of hegemony and primacy, there's lots of ways to remain in the picture, as you put it, right? So I would be more optimistic towards remaining in the picture, whether about sustaining empire or primacy or hegemony or whatever term you want to use. I think those days are increasingly behind us, I think, right? Given the strain on American resources, the political sentiments in the United States, which are much more isolationist than in the past. I think we're certainly moving out of the what if you were to call it a U.S. imperial age, I think we're certainly moving out of that time period now, without question.
So you want to say US is willing to give up as emperor status?
I don't think it's about whether or not you're willing to give it up. I think it's just it's going to be gone, right? You have to have a certain level of what you call it imperial status. The word I would use is primacy or hegemony, right? But whatever you want to call it, I would say that regardless of whether or not you want to have it, if you're going to sustain it, you have to have the material capabilities to do so. And China is simply too strong now for that to be maintained, right? So America cannot dominate Asia in the way that it can in the past. China is simply too strong. Uh, what America can do, I argue, is by working with its high trust, high capacity partners such as Japan, South Korea, and Australia, is maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific where no one dominates. That, I argue, is what the goal for US policy should be. But if there's going to be an imperial power or hegemonic power or primacist power in Asia, whatever you want to call it, it's not going to be the United States.
But neither US want or let them others should be emperor. So,
The age of American global primacy is over. There's no question about that. I mean that was never going to be sustained, right? I mean, after the Soviet Union's implosion, America was kind of the last man standing, right? That was never going to last, right? That was just a temporary
but
blip.
some many Americans still argue they are still of emperor status.
Yeah, well, I mean,
So
and you're
that's
arguing that
the
they
thing,
want,
you know.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, but it's coming to an end. There's no question about it, right? Because during the Cold War, right, contestation of the Soviet Union was the principal objective of U.S. foreign policy, right? Then the Soviet Union went away, and the United States had no more competitors. So it was able to have, whether you call it global primacy, global hegemony, global empire, that was materially possible. It is no longer materially possible, right? If you compare Chinese manufacturing capacity versus American uh, industrial capacity, there's no comparison, right? The future of warfare is increasingly going to be determined by, for example, how many drones you can produce, right? And in that domain, China absolutely outpaces the United States. So to be clear, I'm not arguing China is going to be able to easily overtake the United States, like definitively, but the gap between them has shrunk way too much that it's just not materially powerful. It's not materially possible enough for America to dominate global politics in the way that it did in the 1990s and 2000s. So I don't think it's a question of whether or not the United States is willing to give that status up. I think it's just over. That's my view. The United States is still incredibly powerful, but
But
primacy and hegemony, that's when you're so powerful you're able to just dominate the system. That is over. That being said, the United States will continue to remain to be extremely powerful and extremely relevant to any global conversation. But the days where it can pretty much do whatever it wants whenever it wants, those days are over. That's my argument.
right, especially Indo-Pacific region, US want to prevent Chinese supremacy at least. You strongly argue ASEAN can ASEAN is in the middle for
Yep.
this game. Japan position is clear, Japan neither Chinese can influence domestically and regionally or in any aspect. A lot of Chinese interfering, influencing Korea domestic and even election weeks or Korean politics. And many argue the left wing is so strong in Korea because of Chinese influence.
Yeah, no, I'm very glad you asked. So I wrote my senior paper at the Lee Kuan Yew School, essentially assessing and comparing and explaining the differences of Japanese and South Korean influence in Southeast Asia. And what I found and what I argued is that while both countries, Japan and South Korea, are perceived very positively, right, in Southeast Asia, right, Southeast, not want to painting a broad brush, as you know, each Southeast Asian country is highly distinct and highly different. with its own sets of preferences and challenges. But generally speaking, while both countries are perceived as being very attractive and very positively viewed, Japan is viewed as much more relevant and much more powerful and much more involved in the regional order politics and security of Southeast Asia than South Korea is. Uh, I basically argue that this is not just a result of the North Korea threat, which takes up much of South Korea's bandwidth, but also because of South Korea's history as a shrimp among whales, right? Where South Korea today is obviously an incredibly advanced, wealthy, and powerful country, but for most of its history, it has not been, right? So I'm arguing there are still lots of what we call the logic of habit within the South Korean foreign policy making that still causes it to often behave like a small state, even though it's not a small state anymore. So that was kind of my central intervention and contribution. As far as your discussion about South Korean domestic politics and the role of China, I mean that's obviously an incredibly contentious topic, as both of us well know, living here in Seoul. But I don't know. I mean, I think the left wing, that's always been the accusation that they're closer to China, and they're certainly they are the President Lee's party is obviously less uh, inherently opposed to
But
China in the way that the right wing is. But I think that if you look at the way President Lee has conducted his policy so far, I think most people in Washington have actually been pleasantly surprised. He's maintained the core alignment with the United States. He's increased cooperation with Japan and other states in the region. Yes, he's had a positive relationship with Xi Jinping, but if you go beyond the photo ops and things like that, President Lee's substantive cooperation with the United States and even Japan has been much stronger than it has been with China. So I think, of course, there are meaningful differences within the political preferences of the two parties here in South Korea, and that has a meaningful impact. But I think there's a basic shared strategic consensus across both camps here in South Korea. So I don't view the South Korean left as pro-Chinese per se. I think it's still pro-US, but perhaps with more nuance than the political right here in South Korea, to give you a
let's
lot to work with.
see. Even within Levin also divided probably. You said
Yep. Yeah.
President Lee position is they are he is not that much leaning to Levin. He's not that pro North Korea or pro China. And maybe probably there is a division within left wing party. Some are pro North Korea, pro China. But you
Yeah.
said President Lee is not that person. He is more even his good relationship with US.
I think he's been quite effective so far. I think in as far as most right-wing Koreans I've spoken to kind of have a grudging acknowledgement that diplomatically he's done quite a good job so far. And I think most people who have been skeptical of him in Washington have assessed him to have performed quite well so far. So, I mean, think about it with Takaichi, right? If you would imagine a left-wing populist in South Korea and a right-wing populist in Japan, you would imagine that to be the worst possible combination and relations would completely implode. But we haven't seen that. Things have gone quite well. So yeah, I think I think the structural conditions and the security environment of South Korea is so severe that I think it really limits how much difference can really occur between the leaders of various factions within South Korea, regardless of who the president is. Not to say that that doesn't matter, of course it does, but I would not overstate that effect, I guess.
Right.
Is my-
Last time also I saw a professor. He is also from America. Now he is teaching in Busan, one of university. He is expert in North Korea.
yeah.
He is PhD from Russia, something like that. So he also said North Korea desire of a nuclear weapon and how they get assistance from Russia. I mean, 5 years, 10 years ago, probably North Korea nuclear should be destroyed at the time. But because of uh, South Korea domestic politics, not strongly determined or divided as you see, left and right and pro North Korea, and some are pro North Korea, some are sympathy to North Korea, helping North Korea. That they fail to destroy nuclear weapon. Now it's become the most dangerous nuclear weapon
Yep.
South Korea, not just South Korea, in the whole region. It's global security problem, you know.
Well, in the US too. I mean, I think North Korea, I think the way if it ever was wise to take some kind of action to destroy North Korea's nuclear program, it's long past now, right? I mean, every credible analysis I've read has said that the regime survival is of course their most important motive, and to that end they've established much better relationships with Russia and China, so they have external support, and their nuclear weapon program is more effective than it's ever been, right? So most serious analysts now think that North Korea could hit multiple targets in the American homeland with a nuclear weapon if they were willing to risk everything else for it, right? So it's an incredibly dangerous time for South Korea and the United States, and North Korea is an incredibly dangerous. But and that's why a lot of people are thinking that now that North Korea can hit the United States, it's important that South Korea acquires a nuclear weapon because extended deterrence, the idea that America would defend South Korea from a North Korean attack, might no longer be credible because North Korea could then retaliate against the American homeland in a way that it couldn't in the past, right? So the North Korea nuclear weapon is more dangerous than ever right now, and it's causing a lot of rethinking, both in Seoul and Washington. So yeah,
Definitely, and North Korea is increasing nuclear weapon production, probably hundreds or something like that.
yeah.
And South Korea, you said, so in order to counterbalance, South Korea should also have nuclear weapon.
I mean,
You suggest that. But Japan is willing to have nuclear weapon.
uh,
I mean, the main concern is whether US will allow them, US agree them
yeah.
Japan to have it or not. I mean, Japan can have it, and if Japan has nuclear weapon, it will be game changer in the region. North Korea threat can be, I mean, Japan can take care if Japan has
Yeah.
nuclear weapon, if South Korea
Yeah.
has nuclear weapon. But I don't know, US will be agree to have Japan
Yeah.
nuclear weapon, or if they don't agree Japan to have nuclear weapon, US can take care this nuclear threat from North Korea. That's the main challenge, US responsibility.
But I mean, I'm not endorsing a South Korean weapon, but I think these questions are sharper than they've ever been, is my point, right? So I think these debates will just grow hotter and hotter.
And it's made permanent security risk for the continent and the Venezuela, the region.
Even if you take the nuclear question out of it, right? I mean, the city that we're sitting in right now is within artillery range of North Korean forces, right? And they had a large arsenal of chemical warfare and things like that. So maybe it's easy to say in theory that you would, execute that attack and eliminate this threat, but it would result in at least tens of thousands of deaths, probably more. It would completely destabilize the region and the peninsula. So, you know, maybe it would have been a better window then than now, and maybe it would have been worth it in theory. But I think if
But
you put
now
yourself in
it's
the shoes of
more,
those officials,
if
yeah,
you
no, I think now we're just stuck. Now we're stuck.
if you do now, it will be more casualty and more problematic, because they are more weapon. That
Yep.
time they
Yeah.
are almost no weapon. They are just
Yep.
beginning or developing even one or two, something like that. They can
Yeah.
destroy easily, and US is willing, and many people are willing to do it, but there was obstacle.
And I guess I would just add that I wouldn't underestimate how destructive the war would have been, right? Even before the advanced North Korean nuclear program, right? It would have been a horrible conflict, right? With tremendous risk and loss. So it's very easy for me to understand why South Korean or American officials didn't want to take that step. Though of course, obviously, if you were going to do it then versus now, then would have been better. But then it still would have been a horrible situation. So
Because now will be much worse, and
yes, yes,
alternative to have nuclear in South Korea and Japan is more headache for many countries because it will be nuclearizing the region. Japan have a lot of nuclear, South Korea has a lot of nuclear weapon. It is more danger for global security. As you said, South Korea and I mean Korea, Japan should play more to convince ASEAN countries for Indo-Pacific geopolitics. South Korea is one of important as you said, shrimp, even bigger than shrimp in terms of GDP and economy, all this capacity, how South Korea look like and supposed to be very powerful, more than shrimp, that many people see that as you also see that, but why it's not happened, that is the question. And one of important thing in ASEAN, they use more about ODA, overseas
Mm.
development assistance,
Yeah.
humanitarian aid, those things. That is a good idea, that a good policy. But the problem is whether that policy is properly working or is a showcase, or that's the question. So
Yeah.
uh, many ODA, where ODA is gone and how it was helpful ASEAN, how humanitarian aid helpful, how ODA helpful.
Yeah, well, so I focused less on ODA in my work because I was principally focused on like Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia. My understanding is ODA is most relevant for like Laos, Cambodia, countries like that. Uh, it's interesting when I spoke to a Vietnamese expert on these topics, and I brought up ODA with him. He said that, Vietnam has kind of moved past that stage. So I think when you're engaging with countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, there's obviously a place for ODA, but I think what's more effective is things like investments and supply chains and working on things like critical minerals and infrastructure and ports and those that seems to be the leading edge economic engagement with the states that are largest within ASEAN by GDP. I think ODA is more relevant to countries like Laos and Cambodia. That's less my own expertise. I mean, I would imagine that the key, right, is that it's not being utilized by predatory elites for rent seeking or things of that nature, right? That it's actually going towards real development goals within those countries, right? I am not it is not my place to say how effective South Korean or Japanese ODA has been to those ends. But yeah, I guess it would be I will say just traveling around the region, I saw the signs for ODA type projects much more often in Laos and Cambodia than I did in other countries such as Vietnam or Indonesia or what have you. So
Right, right. I mean, as you say, ODA should be very attractive and very useful and convince, especially developing those countries. Also, humanitarian aid is very important, but overseas development assistance, it was never appear as a shrimp level, even a shrimp level. It was not look like a shrimp level, even less than shrimp, very insignificant. I mean, if you have bigger economies, you have bigger products,
hmm.
you can able to see there should be significant to see if European aid, American aid, you can see bigger project and bigger people can see, they can see that is tangible,
Yeah.
you know, as scholarship through that's part of ODU, So many students came and they came, but they get degree, they graduated, they've been here 2 years for master degree, maybe 3 years for PhD, something like that. And they go back.
Hmm.
But we don't know what the knowledge they can able to produce regional knowledge, regional policy knowledge. I mean, the output, we have to see the output, what the
Hmm.
student have learned or gained studying Korea, as you said, to attract the Indo-Pacific regional policy. But nobody can input or produce knowledge to impact this regional policy. So they just simply come and finish and not really make output. That is an example of scholarship. Just professor is satisfied eating food or sandwich with the student and your funding time during their stay here and they given degree. They may do that, but the question is, as you a policymaker, you expected that those students should have some knowledge, contribute to the regional policy to convince ASEAN to that Indo-Pacific policy. But it was not happening. There
Hmm.
was no output,
Yeah, so you're saying you're not getting the outcomes from those initiatives that you would want. And
right?
are you saying uh it hasn't performed well compared to its peers from other large countries?
Regional think tank or this policy think tank. And my think tank is very well known and all people know in the region, also internationally, you know. But I'm not benefit from OIGA
Hmm.
or ODA assistance for Korea government. I don't get any assistance.
Hmm.
But my contribution is more than everybody. I produce every week's uh, policy and knowledge sharing, especially
Hmm.
that is helpful for regional Indo-Pacific policy in this geopolitical or international relation, regional issue.
Maybe it just hasn't been fully developed yet, or funding or bureaucratic attention. I couldn't say. Unfortunately, this is not an area of my you know, this ODA realm that you're discussing is unfortunately not my area of study or expertise or research. So
Right.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean that's about when you say about South Korea, you want to see like a shrimp, bigger than shrimp.
Yeah.
But now you cannot see as a shrimp, even smaller than shrimp in
Oh
terms
yeah. Well,
output,
that's
in
that's
terms of
yeah.
output.
Well, it certainly should be a shrimp, right? Because I think if you run down all the metrics, right, it's really, I mean, America and China are in a league of their own in terms of their capabilities, but besides those two, South Korea's capabilities really are, there's no one else that's like way ahead of South Korea aside from the two superpowers, right? So if if Japan or Australia or UK or whichever European country or Canada, if they're able to get something done on these initiatives, then there's no reason South Korea can't, right? Because it certainly has the underlying capacity to do so.
Sure. Top 10 economic power or OECD member, South Korea is a very big. You are rightly said it should be more than shrimp. So at least, I mean, such big economic power and growing country, they should able to support or finance like our think tank. Even I'm based in Korea, they just doing for their own convenience, their own personal desire. They just use ODA or OIGA funding so that you cannot expect certain output or you cannot expect like string, bigger than
Hmm.
string. That is that's eventually the reason, I guess.
So I mean, obviously they've done a great job of building their economy and achieving their core strategic security and strategic objectives and having a positive diplomatic relationship generally. But there's obviously a lot of domains that remain undeveloped as you've just detailed. So
Right? Or I mean, big countries should have big mind, big uh, big capacity, big helping hand.
South Korea is a very complicated case, right? Because during the Joseon era, it kind of considered itself like more Confucian than the Confucians in China. Then it went through the Japanese imperialistic period and a very rough modernization process, and now it's had the incredibly heavy Western exposure through the very long American partnership and alliance. And things of that nature, right? So it's not an easy country to categorize into one bucket or another. I mean, I guess to the point that you want to say that it is distinct from other cultures, it's obviously had a very strong emphasis on excellence and accountability, and you don't get, and valuing education and all the, but I think its history, I think, is what I would zero in more on, right? And it's history of constantly having to engage with countries that are much bigger and powerful than it has really left a very strong mark, and I think has created certain habits that don't necessarily align with its current position, right? I mean, say Ujung Gore, right? Like shrimp among whales. That's that's the sentence that always appears in the first couple of pages of any book on Korean history, right?
Right.
So yeah, I generally favor what you might call historical path dependency over cultural determinism. But yeah, I mean, obviously the Confucian influence and now how it's been layered on with the new Western influence is important as well. So
Even Confucian is original from China, but China destroyed during Cultural Revolution a lot, you know. So the point is we are talking how Korea can use its economic capacity or any military capacity to convince, attractive to the ASEAN, you know, that we are talking, including Myanmar. Myanmar is also very important for Korea ODA or Overseas Development System, KOICA project. But as we discussed, the output is not matched as we expected. It is not happening as like a stream, especially overseas project, you know, so because nobody much complain, uh, not easy to complain from overseas. It's not successful attracting ASEAN countries at this point.
yeah, I mean, I think more than the hierarchical element or anything like that, I would probably just add caution is probably a very important part of their strategic culture, right? So if something is not, directly necessary or essential, there's probably going to be some level of caution towards fully pursuing it, right? Uh, that being said, real gains have been made, right? Starting with the Moon administration's New Southern policy, and then certain elements of that were continued under the Yoon administration, and now Lee is engaging various ASEAN heads of states very vigorously. So, it is a real growing trend. The term I used in my senior paper at the Lee Kuan Yew School was green shoots, right? You're seeing real green shoots in its ties beyond its immediate neighborhood. But yeah, certainly it hasn't fully developed to the extent that a country like Japan has yet. So
So you see, you like very much President Lee, or you appreciate the President Lee policy.
no, I mean, I'm not really a strong partisan either way in Korean politics. I mean, my focus is much more on the foreign and defense policy and international relations and diplomacy than I am on domestic policy, right? So Korea is very much like the United States in that most people vote on domestic policy, not foreign policy. So I don't have strong opinions on which party is better than the other on domestic policy, which is what matters more for most Koreans. What I will say on foreign policy, on diplomacy, things of these nature, I think both presidents, President Yoon during his tenure and President Lee so far, I think they both have generally done a relatively good job, right? So Korean foreign policy, regardless of who is in power, I think on the foreign policy side has been generally pretty good. I just think it's been overly cautious. I think that is the main critique I would add, you know. And I think that there is room for a bigger role to be played within the region. And that would be great for most regional states, and it would be great for the United States if South Korea took up more initiative, right? Because it has a lot to offer the world and the region and its allies and partners. So yeah.
Let's see, it's hopeful and the future of Korea, Korea kind of convincing, attracting ASEAN ASEAN region, ASEAN country in this Indo-Pacific policy. But the thing is, in order to go further step, they should not repeat as before. Of personal desire, investment, or
Yeah.
kind of assistance, it should be overcome, I guess.
Yeah. Gets thrown around a lot as a dolphin, right? Because no
Right,
one's going
Lord?
to be a whale
Are you
except for the United States and China. I will say in terms of like developing and maturing more from a shrimp into a proper dolphin for South Korea and its regional role. I mean, I'm sure there's a place for ODA, but I think what would be best is you know, uh, greater like investment initiatives and things like that. So just to give you one example, right? Like EV batteries are going to be an incredibly important industry for the future, right? And there are some very good South Korean firms in that industry, but recently Chinese firms have taken a huge amount of market share from South Korea, right? So that is something where there's a strong need for South Korea and its partners to uh in order to make sure that it's not a Chinese dominated supply chain to invest in those firms within South Korea, right? And they're going to need the minerals and the local processing on site. And ASEAN countries like Indonesia and the Philippines are great places for that, right? So the nickel industry in Indonesia is becoming increasingly Chinese dominated, but I think if you thought about some kind of joint effort between the United States and South Koreans and Japan or even some European states and what have you to partner with that and contribute to with those firms and those industries within Southeast Asia itself. I think that's a great opportunity, right? That would serve very well, right? So that's not ODA. That's more strategic investments and supply chains and things of that matter. But that's my point is that there's lots of opportunities, right?
sure,
Even
sure.
if even if it hasn't materialized yet. So.
Right, sure, sure. It should be, more effectively using ODA assistance. They should at least contribute to regional issue, regional
Hmm.
policy, Indo-Pacific policy, in this geopolitical international relation context.
Yep. Hopefully it can be like a dolphin very soon.
Right.
I don't think unification is in the cards anytime soon. I don't think that's a controversial statement to say. I think, I think most Koreans will still have a certain level of attachment to the idea that all the people of the peninsula are one people and fundamentally they should be united. So you want to never say never, but I think the incentives of the regime in Pyongyang are very clear, right? That they prioritize regime survival and they have the capabilities to guarantee that. And ever since they've reestablished strong relations with Russia, then China has had to come in to make sure that North Korea doesn't become a Russian satellite, right? So they've successfully played China and Russia off against each other. So now they have very strong relationships with both of them. And they have the nuclear capabilities, right, to defend themselves from attack. Uh, and a lot of reporting in places like the Wall Street Journal has said that the North Korea economy has actually been doing relatively well. So, there isn't any reason to think that the North Korean regime is weak enough to be absorbed by the South anytime soon. And I don't think anyone in the South wants to incorporate, the Northern regime into its own political power structures. So, reunification is never going to be dead, and people are never going to fully give up on it. But it doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. No, so they shouldn't subordinate. I mean, hopefully they won't, right? Hopefully they won't subordinate other interests and other policies to unification interests, right? Because that's probably not happening anytime soon. I mean, I think the thing that is most encouraging to me is how strong ties with Japan has become, right? Like I said before, you have right now what should be on paper the worst possible combination of a Japanese and South Korean leader, right? But ties are still flourishing anyway, right? So I think most people, in Seoul, while they haven't given up on unification, like I said, they understand that it's not, happening anytime soon, that you shouldn't be subordinating other policies and other interests to it, right? So they're not, no South Korean government is going to, most South Korean governments are not going to administrations are going to tell like resist stronger ties to Japan for the sake of unification or something like that, right? So I'm cautiously optimistic that such interests would not get in the way of pursuing otherwise sensible policies.
You said if North Korea's increase producing nuclear weapon, South Korea should also have nuclear weapon. Well, U.S. agree. Even Japan, I don't know. U.S. will agree. How
Yeah,
do you
no,
see the
I mean, I'm not arguing per se. I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not. It's not my position that South Korea should get nuclear weapons. I'm just saying it's very unsurprising, right? That it's something that many South Koreans are now considering and wanting, right? Because the premise of South Korean defense against North Korean nuclear weapons is extended deterrence, right? The idea that if North Korea strikes South Korea, America would respond in turn on North Korea. In the past, that was very credible because North Korea couldn't hit the United States. But now North Korea can credibly say, well, America, if you hit us, we'll hit you back, right? So because extended deterrence is much weaker, you need to consider other options to securing South Korea against the North Korean nuclear threat. And that's my point. That's my main point.
Oh,
So
well, I mean, U.S. will agree not South Korea to a nuclear weapon.
I mean, at the moment, official policy is still against that, right? I'm just saying that the conditions, the regional balance of power has changed, right? With nor
Right,
with so when the underlying circumstances change, you need to reconsider your position to make it more in line with that, right? So I think such a reassessment is very much overdue from people in Seoul and in Washington. So
right. That is the main issue in terms of global security. Whether South Korea should have nuclear weapon or Japan should have nuclear weapon in order to counterbalance with North Korea threat. In theory, U.S. will be able, U.S. is duty to strike back or help North Korea, South Korea and Japan if North Korea threat. But how long U.S. can able to do it? How much can we? Because if North Korea threat, North Korea strike, China strike, Russia strike, multiple strike, how
yeah.
U.S. alone can able to
Yeah,
manage
exactly. And that's
back
part
up?
of the problem,
That is
right?
all
Is
that.
that all three legs of the Northern Triangle have that capability, whereas in the Southern Triangle, only one does, and it's on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So it's very concerning. It's very concerning.
That's why U.S. should think a
Yep.
lot whether
Yep.
Japan should have nuclear weapon or South Korea
Yep.
should have nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Otherwise, at the beginning, 5, 10 years old, is the best solution is to destroy North Korea.
Well,
Nuke
yeah,
North
that's
Korea.
that
But
that that
it's
window is
way too
closed, but
early.
yeah. Thank you
Okay,
very
thank
much.
you. Thank you.